Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome to this episode of the OT is In podcast titled Parenting with Co-Regulation. My guest today is Gigi Vera, a fellow homeschooling mom and postpartum birth doula. She helps us to understand the truth about self-care and how it affects our parenting starting at birth, but it doesn't stop there. Since our nervous systems are meant to be in relationship, we are co-regulating our entire parenting journey. Gigi starts by addressing pressing concerns that parents often have about getting their babies on a schedule, ensuring they sleep through the night. But are these actually developmentally appropriate? And if not, how do we help ourselves to regulate when sleep, nutrition, and that constant sensory input can lead to overwhelm for us? Then, as our kids age, these concepts of self-regulation and co-regulation don't go away. Thankfully, Gigi shares practical tips on preparing children for challenging activities like recognizing and eliminating triggers and modeling emotional regulation. Additionally, Gigi highlights the significance of self-care using resources like journaling, and she recommends essential reads such as The Whole Brain Child, one of my personal favorites, and How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, now on my to-be-read list. So join us as we explore the delicate balance of parenting, co-regulation, and the importance of understanding and responding to both your own and your children's emotional needs. Now, on with the show. In episodes 29 through 32, you'll be hearing more about sensory processing. As we are beginning the school year, I don't know about you, but I feel even more demands. Even though I truly believe we're learning all the time, even through the summer, fall brings new rhythms, new routines, sports practices, co-ops starting, everything. This year, our family were even making dietary changes requiring more time cooking. My kids need me differently, and I need to be available to them. And this requires me to be intentional about my own sensory processing so that I can co-regulate with them. My body must be regulated so that they can be. You'll be learning more about this during the podcast, but we do go even deeper in the sensory balanced homeschool focus group. So this is a month-long class where new material comes to you in bite-sized chunks every week. You'll learn about each of the 8 sensory systems, ways to study your student to find more about their needs, strategies to help regulate the brain and body, and most importantly, a community of other homeschool families like yourself. I did mention that it's a month long, but I also know how busy that we can get as homeschool moms. So you have lifetime access to the group, including an invitation to our live question and answer, which happens approximately every 3 months in that group. We'd love to have you join us. You can find more information at homeschoolot.com, or more specifically, homeschoolot.com/sensory-focus-group. Hope to see you there. Now, on with the show. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In podcast. Today, I have Gigi Vera here with me, who is a fellow homeschool mom, but also a doula. And she's going to tell us all about what that looks like, but then also we're going to dive into a little bit more about what is co-regulation and what is that like in the early years and then as we move through. So, Gigi, I'm just going to go ahead and throw it right to you. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and, what brought you into this path of homeschooling and doula?
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah, for having me on. I'm a fan of the podcast. I love all things OT, PT, speech. Like I love all of the T's. So I'm happy
Me too.
to
Thanks.
be here. I'm happy to be here sharing. I think there is a huge overlap between my work as a doula and my work as a homeschool parent. So I work as a doula and I was brought into that work a little bit with my sister-in-law, and she was a birth doula at the time and I was a teacher at the time, and we've actually switched. She's a teacher and I'm a doula.
Well,
So
that's
we
so
we swapped.
interesting.
Yeah, we swapped jobs, but I just learned a little bit about birth through her. I was there outside of the room when my niece and nephew were born. I was a teenager and I was like, what is this? This is terrifying. And then when it came time to having my own children, I realized just though our system is really not set up to support parents, it's not set up to help us advocate for ourselves and really learn about our options. And I would say in that way, education is the same. So I work as a postpartum doula, especially now post COVID. During COVID, we were not really in the hospitals a whole lot. I had just had my twins at the very start, March 2020. I had my twins. And so I realized how difficult postpartum is when you don't have a village. And I wanted to fill that gap. And what that looks like for me as a postpartum doula is I'm giving a ton of education. I am teaching you what is it like to have a newborn? What actually do newborns behave like? How do we take care of a baby, whether that's safe feeding, safe sleep, safe infant care, as well as caring for yourself? How do we recover?
Right.
In the United States, we're just told to bounce back, get back to work. Most people in the United States are returning to work 2 weeks after having a baby, which is bananas.
What?
Yeah, 2 weeks. That's
Two
nothing. You are still
weeks.
bleeding. You don't know what you're
Wow.
doing. So, yeah, the average person is really not getting any leave. And so I try to fill that gap as much as possible to help take care of a baby, but also really take care of yourself. And in that way, there is such an overlap that as a homeschool parent, you are giving everything to your kids, and it's really hard to care for yourself. So
Yeah.
I personally see such an overlap in my work in both of these roles. And how I got into homeschooling was I was a teacher for many years. I taught English at the college level and English as a second language at the college level. I never really got into teaching children. I never really had any interest in teaching children. I loved teaching adults. And so I just tried to take all of that knowledge into really giving my children an alternative.
Mhm.
I love school. I could sit at a desk all day. Like the typical public school system was perfect for me. I loved it, but I recognized pretty early on that that wasn't really the best fit for my kids. So just trying a little bit something different, and they do a drop-off program. They're at home. I'm very blessed to have that education. I'm not that everybody needs all of that extensive teaching experience, but it
Mhm.
really helps me because I'm type A.
Oh, I love that. So you mentioned a few things that really stood out to me. One that you talked about is self-care, and I feel like that's such a hot topic, and it's defined in so many different ways. In some ways, in pop culture, it's defined as going in me time and getting my nails done, and all of that looks very can look very different. So, what would you say your definition of self-care is?
Yeah. So in the early days, and I would say not even just in the early days, but all through parenting, we need to be meeting our basic needs. That's different than self care. So
Mhm.
when I'm coming into someone's home as a postpartum doula, I am making sure that they are eating enough. We know through research on like postpartum depletion, which is like your mineral levels are so low that if you are not eating enough, you are not staying hydrated,
Yeah.
not eating. In the United States, we just have this bounce back culture of have a smoothie. And I love smoothies. That's not, I'm hating on smoothies, but we know that we need to be eating warm, nourishing food. And if you are not eating those things, that you are going to have more likely a like some type of perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. So that might be postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. So if we are eating, and I would say the same goes for parenting, how often are we starting our day and we get an hour or two in and we realize we haven't really eaten anything, we haven't had anything besides like a cup of coffee? Those I would say are our basic needs: showering, brushing our teeth, and even our basic social needs. But the way that I describe it is based on a book called Birthing from Within. It's this idea that when you are going in to meet your baby and deliver your baby, you're going into a labyrinth. And it's all of these twists and turns. It's not a maze where the goal is to get you lost. The goal is for you to get into the middle and meet your baby. And then we need something to bring us out of that. So that's like you're exiting the labyrinth, you're finding yourself, you're coming back to yourself, but you're a new person. I don't want to say find your way back, just be yourself again, because you can't do a lot of the things. And that goes the same for homeschooling. When you commit to homeschooling, your kids are with you a lot. You're stuck with them. They have to go with you places. You're not going to get all that free time the same as when you have a baby. I think everybody has that realization of, oh my gosh, I can't just drop everything and go to the grocery store, or I can't just drop everything and run to Target. I can't drop everything and do things that I feel like, because I have to think about all these children now. And that is a mindset shift. So a little bit of my work is making sure we're meeting our basic needs. That's the bare minimum. That is not self-care. Eating a meal is not self-care. And then outside of that is all of the ways out of that labyrinth. So for me as a new mom, that looked like having people around. I know we have this idea of like cocooning, especially through COVID and coming out of COVID. We want to be in our own little bubble. That does not work for me. I don't like to be isolated. I'm a very social person. I loved having 20 people come over and just talk to me. For me, that's social interaction. I love to read. So that's reading. That's a lot of, I already said, hanging out with people. I love doing my husband and I both try to do meeting up with our friends and talking with our friends. And then if you're the type of person that you love having a full face of makeup and getting dressed, do that. That's not me. But if your thing is getting back to some type of physical activity, going to the gym, start doing that when it's safe. So I would say there's like the basic hierarchy of getting your needs met. And then on top of that, getting those like social needs met, getting those personal needs met, and just being you outside of a parent. I think that's important.
That's so fascinating. I've been reading a lot of research recently on happiness and like what that leads to or what leads to theoretically happiness. And two of the things that you mentioned there, it talks some in one of the books that I've been reading, talks a lot about we are oriented in one way, right? And then something happens and you become disoriented and you have a baby, you have a big life change, and your worldview actually changes because your priorities are different. And then there becomes this whole transformation. And that's so similar to what you're saying, is you're not the goal to get in and get out, but you've got this reorient and mindset shift that has to happen and part of what allows that mindset shift is the self-care in those definitions.
Yeah.
Ooh, I love it.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way to describe that we are finding ourselves, and that's going to look different for everybody. And I think part of the reason why I love my work as a doula so much and why that works so well for me, because I love to chat. I love to give practical skills and help people figure out their way, is I wish that I could tell people like, oh, this is how you do that as a parent. But everybody's work situation looks different. Everybody's home looks different. What looks different within your relationship or your support system? So if I could say, oh, take shifts, that might not work for a certain family. Or if I say sleep when the baby sleeps, that's not very helpful advice. Like, how do I get in there? And I think of it as a little bit like I'm an investigator and I'm finding ways for this to work for your family.
You're speaking the OT language right here. That was what makes me like, oh, yes, so much. Because as an OT, and especially within homeschool OT, I'm always considering what are the skills that one person has? How can I meet you where you are right now? And how does the environment contribute to that? And which is the rest of your family and where your physical space where your physical space is, and then thinking about what you need and want to do. And so that's everything that you've just explained right there. Ooh, I love it. All right.
Bringing that OT work.
Right? So if we have defined what self-care would be, then what would you say is co-regulation? So these things, if we are not ourselves regulated, we cannot help our children. But can you talk through that a bit more for us?
Yes, I would say this comes up so much, even like in preparing my thoughts for this conversation. It felt like this week it was happening so much in my work. I spoke to about 3 parents this week just about feeling confident as a new parent and feeling like when their baby is upset, they are triggered. And how do we handle that? So I describe co regulation to my new parents or expecting parents as this idea that babies and children are really picking up on you and your energy. So when you're stressed, they will feel that and they will act accordingly. So co-regulation as a caregiver is we are working to create a calming presence, maybe with our voice, maybe with the environment, and that makes our children feel safe. And long term, the goal eventually is that our children will be able to self-regulate. That doesn't mean at 2. I see that happening with my 7-year-old. And I would say I've seen that starting to all of the work that I've done to give him those skills. I see it a little bit with my twins. They're not there yet, but really with my oldest, I see that starting to play out where he can name his feelings, he can express them, and he can process them in a healthier way. I grew up in a you're fine, it's okay kind of family, distract. And so those were things that I had to learn on my own in my own journey as becoming a parent and a fully functioning human. But those are really, that's my goal as a parent, is to give them that skill so that if something pops up, like a little issue or a big issue, things don't go according to plan, they are going to have the tools to be like, okay, how do we handle this instead of freaking out?
And one of the things you mentioned there makes perfect sense because you're talking about your own story, right? And how even your background, how that plays into what you're doing now. And you talking about in relationship, right? So you've had to think about what happened as a child to me and how did I grow up? And that's because you were in relationship at that point. And so co-regulation is so important with that relationship. So when you're speaking towards, all right, I'm having to dismantle almost and think through what do I want to lead in for my children because they're in relationship, right? This is the basis of co-regulation, is knowing that we are meant to be in relationship and we're going to be picking things up about from our stories into the future.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to interrupt this episode for a bit of a funny story. Well, at least it's funny now. When we started homeschooling, this wouldn't have been so funny. My daughter was in 4th grade and she is now in 11th for a bit of perspective. But I did not trust myself, nor did I know how long this experiment of home education while moving to a new state was going to last. I didn't want her to learn math differently than her peers so that she'd be ready when she went back to, quote, real school. In Pennsylvania, our school systems allow us to borrow curriculum, so I borrowed their math curriculum. But they don't let us borrow the teacher's guide, only the student portion. So every day, my 4th grader and I would sit down and do math together. I had a 1st grader and a 1-year-old also running around my feet, and I never knew if I was 100% correct because I didn't have the answers. So we dove into an introduction to decimals and fractions, but it did not take long before we were both frustrated. Before we both dreaded what I heard was going to be this beautiful experience of us learning together. She finally said to me, "Mom, your brain is not like mine. Dad does it better." Sucker punch. I'd like to think that I reacted beautifully, but I don't think that I did. Our relationship was suffering. And looking back, that dread was causing me to be tense, and it affected the rest of my day, as well as my relationship with my then 6-year-old and 1-year-old. She was not learning at the pace she wanted, and nor was she retaining as much information. Because as you know through these episodes, memory and retention require sensory regulation. Neither of us were regulated. So we started using CTC Math, and our homeschool changed. She was able to go at her pace, moving through lessons and spending time in areas that she needed or with new concepts, but not with things that she already understood. She stayed with CTC Math until last year when she took pre-calculus and now calculus at our community college for college credit. But more importantly, our relationship did not have this daily disruption. So if you're looking for a math curriculum that works with your kids at their pace and where you can be as involved or as uninvolved as your relationship allows, CTC Math is a perfect fit. So visit ctcmath.com. Now back to the show. Okay, so now that we have defined self-care, we've talked through a little bit about self-regulation, co-regulation. So what are some ways that you encourage this natural relationship between mommy and baby?
So primarily in my work as a doula, I help people attune to their baby. And the biggest way that I do that is teaching them what babies are supposed to do. We're in an amazing time where we can go on our phones or go on our computers, and we can learn all of the things about babies.
All the things.
We can learn all the things.
Information overload.
Yes. And so I would say the biggest thing that I get in my prenatal meetings and in the early weeks with a parent is, when does my baby get on a schedule? When are they sleeping through the night? When are they able to hit this milestone? And so what I have to do is a little bit of that dismantling of clearing away the misinformation that we have about how babies and toddlers actually act. So some big things that I talk about are, babies crying doesn't necessarily mean they're mad. This is how babies communicate. So retraining your body to calm, take a deep breath when your baby is crying and attune to them instead of looking at the clock. A clock is important, and a routine and a schedule has its place in parenting, but in the early days, it's really about learning your baby. And if I always think my baby is mad or sad when they cry, I'm going to have a hard time because I'm going to get triggered every single time they get upset. But that's how they talk. They have no other way to communicate with us. So also, babies want to be held all the time. So this idea that we're going to put babies down in a separate space, and that might happen in the early days when they're still orienting themselves. But a few weeks in, they just want connection.
Meant to be in relationship.
Exactly. Allowing ourselves to just hold our babies, if that's their personality, definitely plays a role here. Some babies want to be held 24/7, others maybe they don't. But giving yourself that permission to hold them for naps if what's best for your baby. Baby wearing, I think, is very important. And getting yourself out of that mindset that your baby is going to be perfectly on a schedule, sleeping and do independent at a few weeks old, because they're just not. We look at primates and they're holding on to their babies for months, a year, up to a year. And that's really where babies are meant to be. They're supposed to be close to us. And that does not mean I didn't hold my babies 24/7 and have them sleep with me 24/7. If that doesn't work for you and your lifestyle, we will get there, but it's not going to happen in day one.
Babies so can we stop for 1 second? Yeah. Because there's so many moms that I talk to that are like, I would love that, but what I'm trying to do is, regulate my own self, and I feel touched out when I have a baby on me all the time. It's like actually making my heart rate speed up right now thinking about it. I loved my babies, loved it. But especially as I had a toddler that I'm chasing around and then this baby on me, and I can't sit at nap trap. That's what I felt like. It was the nap trap. Well, how can we still co-regulate if that's not a possibility right now in our environment?
That's such a good question. So I would say I have also been there. I am still touched out and I have children. I get it. I also am not the most physically affectionate person. I don't want to be touched by my children all day long. So I get that. I would say, if possible, that's when you're bringing people in. So for instance, one of my twins, he wanted to be held all the time. He never wanted, now he can be put down, but he wants to be like cuddling on somebody. And so I asked people to come over, and I would say, please just
hold him.
That's all I want you to do. I don't want to hold him anymore. I'm done. Can we go on a walk? And so I had carriers, even with my oldest, I would have carriers And if somebody would come over and they would say, how can I help you? I would say, can you please put him in a sling or a soft structured carrier or whatever and go on a walk with him? I need a break. So I would say bringing in, if you don't have friends and family that are able to do that, would be like my job as a doula. I'm coming in and I'm giving you that break. I have some clients that they want to sit with me on the sofa and talk the whole shift. I have other clients that are like, I need a break. You take that kid, I'm going to go now. So there's not a right or wrong way to handle that. So that's to say, give yourself that forgiveness and permission. There's nothing to forgive if you don't want to hold your baby all the time. And then in terms of the practicality of it, I was, especially in the early months of COVID, I was not having people over that much the same way that I did with my oldest. So I had to carry them. I had to have I would have two carriers or one carrier depending on their weight. And I would have to do everything in that way. And so when my husband got home from work, or if somebody could come over, I would be like, please just hold them. These babies. And then just realizing that your baby needs that. They need to be held. And so can you put them in a carrier and I guess like disconnect from that a little bit and keep doing the things that you have to do. I had to do that. I had to make meals. I had to take my child on a walk. I had to go take him places while I was holding my toddler or my twins at the time that were babies. And so, yeah, I definitely understand it's difficult. So ask for help, baby wear. And then if you need that moment, put them down, go take a break. They'll be okay.
They will be okay. They will be okay. We oftentimes talk about heavy work and that proprioception and how that heavy, which is anything pushing and pulling or crawling, how that can help to calm your own nervous system, which then does have an effect. And I very vividly remember, so I do not have twins, but I have two boys that are 3 months apart. One's not with us all the time, but is very much a part of our family. And so when they were tiny and I would have them in their carriers, there were times when they were both screaming. And I remember I had them in carriers and I was doing like arm curls, like bicep curls. And I just need a minute before I put you back on me or you're touching me. And I need to calm my own body, doing some squats, doing the same thing. You're still present. You're still there. But that is also a way it's okay for us to say as parents, I need a minute, right? I need a minute. Now, so I recognize the majority of what you do is right after birth, but co-regulation is a lifelong experience, right? Where our nervous systems, again, they're always in relationship. So for you now as like a working homeschool mom, how do you work through that now? How are you regulated and co-regulating with your children at this point?
Yeah, I would say the biggest way that I do that, I have so many things to chat about for this one, but the biggest thing that I have done to move forward in this way is self-regulation and my own personal work. Like I mentioned, this wasn't a skill I was given. I would say that's for this generation. Most of us weren't given that skill. I think it's a very big privilege to have had parents that understood these terms or even what that meant.
Right.
So I check in with myself a lot. Like I said earlier, like sometimes I go and I start my day and I'm 2 meetings in and I'm like, I have to eat. So a lot of that of recognizing my own triggers, I think if it's the right thing for you, seeking therapy to help another outside person chat with you through that, especially after the years after my twins were born, that was really helpful for me of having somebody give me like, oh, this is a trigger for you that I couldn't quite recognize. And sorting through that. I do a lot of deep breathing. I do cold. I have a little ice roller that I pull out. And one thing, I grew up in more of a yelling family. So I think to me, when I feel like yelling, and I would say my children hate this maybe more than they would yelling, but I just I'll sing out what like I'm frustrated and I'll just sing out like that I'm frustrated or narrate what's happening. They don't like it, but it helps me.
No, I think that's fantastic because it's not like I feel, or even just stating a feeling, but instead it's what's going on, narrating. It's that declarative language of this is what I see, this is what I hear, this is.
I'm narrating it, and singing works
you.
better for me. But one of my kids will be like, "Stop singing." So it works for me, so I stick with it. And then
I don't want you to send me a video of you singing.
I did it this morning. We were running a little bit late and I was like, I am getting frustrated. You are not putting on your socks. And he was
It
like,
did make me
stop.
want to go put on my socks. Really, it did.
Yeah, like
So
it has me. Yes, maybe it works. It works for me, but maybe not for them. But better than yelling, I believe. And then another thing is like really tuning into your children and their own personalities of, wow, what is triggering for them and what do they need in that moment? So what is setting them off? What in that moment do they really need? So for instance, one of my sons, he gets upset and I could see him starting to get frustrated and he's not quite big enough to fully regulate that. So I'm narrating what's happening and I'm saying, "What would you like?" And I know, but I want him to figure it out. I'm guiding him towards that. He always wants one of his stuffed animals. So I'm like, okay, I'm always keeping an eye. Where is this stuffed animal that helps him calm down? Versus my daughter, I know she's a little sassy. I know her instinct is to go and slam a door in her room. And so I'm like, okay, what are we gonna do? And I'll say, okay, it feels like you really need to slam something. What can we throw right now? So a little bit of getting to know your children. That's when they're bigger. And do they want to be held or do they want space? And communicating that to them, especially during those toddler years when they're slow. Toddlers are just slow and children are slow. So really setting a timer, talking to them, okay, we have to start getting ready in 10 minutes. Do you want me to set the timer? Do you want to push the button on my phone to set the timer? And giving them time as much as possible.
Love that you're saying you're going to set a timer, because how many times do we as parents be like, we got to go in a minute, and then 10 minutes are passed and then our kids don't even understand time because we've ruined it. So if you're like,
they don't understand the concept of time.
And so if you're like, I want to start this timer, then we can all watch it or we all know and we can hear. Another thing we often do is we have 2 more songs. We have music playing in our house the majority of the time. We have 2 more songs and then we're out the door. And perhaps maybe it's 2 minutes based on whatever songs are on, but still it's giving that we're cueing into it and giving us an end. So it's not just that I'm throwing out random times that I'm not keeping.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also like a benefit with a song. So we have a little Yodo player with cards. So sometimes I will be like, okay, once this Yodo ends, they know like how long they are approximately, like how many stories are in this. Then I'll say, okay, once that ends, we have to start getting ready. We have to start cleaning up. So that's a little bit on me of when we're running late, like me not being the best communicator. And that to me is a trigger. I hate being late, but children are slow. So getting down to their level also really helps. And modeling, I think a big part of co-regulation that we haven't talked about a bunch is modeling my feelings. And I think, I don't know where exactly this came from, but the idea of take a deep breath, use your words. Other options for that might be a little bit more helpful are like, oh my gosh, I'm getting so frustrated right now. I'm going to take a deep breath. Instead of telling them to do it, I'm like, I'm getting really upset. I need to take 2 deep breaths. Or if I'm talking them through it, I'm going to say, should we take 2 deep breaths or 3 deep breaths? What do you think? And giving them that choice. My kids they love power. They love making their decisions. So giving them the choice and narrating my feelings. I'm getting really frustrated because that's the skill eventually I want them to have, right? I want them to be able to realize that they're getting triggered. So if I'm constantly modeling that for them, and I think I have a lot of speech therapists in my family. I was an English professor. So that communication to me is a big ultimate goal in my parenting journey. And then also another thing that I do is monitoring their environment. This for me comes up in TV or shows or podcasts of, are there toys that they have? Are there shows that they're watching or activities that they're doing that are triggering them? So like off the top of my head, my kids really like a show called Gecko's Garage. It's like a little Australian, I think. Sorry if it's from New Zealand. Sorry. A little gecko. And in the newer episodes, there's like a bad guy in it. And so I know that if they watch that, and if I'm not home and somebody else puts that on, we're gonna have to deal with the behavior of them copying and mimicking the bad guy in a show or in a book. So a lot of talking through that or saying, we don't watch that.
Yeah.
My kids love like Hot Wheels, and there are certain Hot Wheels shows that I know they're gonna mimic this behavior, and they're not quite ready for that yet. They are not old enough to understand that a bad guy isn't somebody that we want to copy. At least my 4-year-olds aren't. We eliminate things, toys, activities that are going to trigger them. So right now it's like a little bit of clearing away of
Mhm.
the triggers. And then eventually, once they're old enough, I think of not my children's age, but like social media, a parent has to sort through when are they ready for that and how do we deal with that. I don't have answers on that. I don't have children those ages, but a future parenting issue for me. And so when this comes up in homeschool, at least for me, is my oldest hates writing sentences. So if there's copy work, if there's something where I know he has to write a lot, I know he's going to get triggered. I know he's going to get frustrated. So, how I'm preparing for that, 1 day a week where you're doing that. So, I am preparing that of talking him through. I know you get really frustrated with this. This is hard for you. And I break it up, or we talk about it beforehand, or that's the only activity he's doing kind of in that moment. So those are things. And then I know this is going into your work a little bit, but the movement, we do a
Yes.
lot of movement, things like I'm paying attention to them and I'm like, okay, we need to get outside. So to me, outside time is the easiest fix when they're getting really dysregulated. I have a lot of things that my kids can crash on and jump on. And I have 2 boys too, so they like to throw things and I don't know, wrestle, whatever, not my thing. But crash pads, wrapping them up like little burritos. I have balance beams. I have stepping stones, that heavy work we talked about, jumping, swinging, hanging upside down. Those are big ones for us.
I love it. So you talked quite a bit about observing at the beginning, getting to know your kids, knowing what those triggers are and thinking about within the environment, communicating and modeling. These are all beautiful things. And then providing them with opportunities to regulate them for self-regulation so that then they can co-regulate too. Because that's an important piece of co-regulation when we're thinking about it. It's not just us like we're calm and so then they automatically calm, but in reality, we have to be watching too, because when they are not calm, a tendency can be for us to also not be calm, right? That's the co back and forth piece. It's a give and take. So I love the way that you're kind of empowering them through your own modeling and your own communication to then be able to calm. My daughter and I laugh because she has a tendency, she'll just say, calm down to the dog, to everything. And one day she said to me, Mom, has anyone ever calmed down in the history of the world from the words calm down? And I was like, yeah, probably not. So,
Yes, exactly. And I see such a for me this work starts and why I feel that my work as a doula is so important. It's a lot more than just birth. It's then birth is important, but it's a lot more of when we lay the groundwork now, and I see that as a parent, I see that with my clients that they're repeat doula for multiple children, that when
yeah,
we lay the groundwork, eventually you move from being hands-on, you're getting touched out, to you're more of a guide. You're holding their hand and you're still monitoring the environment. With my almost 7-year-old, I'm not doing these things all day long.
right.
It's a lot more of, hey, I'm noticing this. What do you think about that? A lot more of giving advice if he's open to it and just narrating on my end. So I feel that it is important that we give kids these skills so that as they're adults or like preteens, they're starting to go off into their own kind of world and we are less of
Yeah,
a presence, that they have those skills.
I love this so much. So, if people are looking for you, where can they find you?
Yes. So I am on Instagram, simple home, simple underscore home. And then my website is asimplehome.org. And then also I host 2 podcasts. So the first one is my more like kind of formal podcast, which is Ready for Baby. I interview experts on how do we handle birth, preparing for birth, advocating in that way. And then I also host a podcast called On a Minute. I work with a postpartum retreat, which is a big part of my job. I am checking people in, giving them resources, working within the community to get all of this information out. My goal long term is that everybody has access to this information, that everybody feels supported. My dream is this is government subsidized. Our government and our workplaces are funding postpartum support because it is important. It's just like healthcare. We need it. That's my long-term goal. And that's Amanita Minute. And that's more like casual, fun conversations with moms.
Love it. And you mentioned some resources too. So if you could name two of your very favorite resources, what would those be?
So I will say the biggest resource is yourself, listening to yourself, journaling, taking care of yourself, meeting those basic needs that we talked about, eating enough, hydrating, having things that make you happy, and then the self-care, like extras, and tuning out of all of the outside noise. And for me, my two favorite books, I would say that kind of got me started on my self-regulation journey and co-regulation journey would be the more technical Whole Brain Child by Dan Siegel and Tina Fey Bryson. Yeah, I love that. It is giving. If you don't like the technical aspects, you can move through those parts, but it really is, for me, one of the first ways that I got the language for what I was doing. And then the second one, a little bit easier, more practical tips is How to Talk So Kids Listen. And that's by Joanna Faber and Julie King. And it's a series. So How to Talk So Kids Listen, How to Talk So Little Kids Listen, How to Talk So Teens Listen. So they really give the practical information for, they're saying, how do we name feelings? So it's less of the kind of technical language and more of this is what you do. So I'd say those are my two favorites.
Love it. I will make sure that they are both linked in our show notes here, as well as how people can find you. So thank you so much for being here, for sharing your expertise on self-regulation and then how that pours into right after birth, but then on through childhood and teenagerhood and life, really, and life.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. You're doing such important work. Being an OT is important, and this overlap of OT and homeschool, both of our jobs have a lot of overlap, and I think it's important work. So I appreciate you doing it.
Thank you. It is truly an honor to serve in this way. It's my favorite. So thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.